The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
You're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
A few years ago, I had a chance to go to Costa Rica for my PhD program. We went to study international development, the economic development in Costa Rica. And something interesting happened that I'm not sure if it was transformative, but I would never forget it. I got into an argument with friends and black friends, black in general. We met a woman. A woman came and spoke to us, and she was of African descent. She was Costa Rican, and we all afterwards got into a big argument. And I'm the only African American in the group. Everyone else was from some other nation. They were black. They were part of the diaspora, African descent, but they were from another nation. One friend was from Haiti. Another friend was from Dominican Republic. Another friend was from Jamaica. And then, of course, the woman who spoke to us was of African descent from Costa Rica. And the argument that we got into was the idea that they had in their mind that African Americans had no culture. And more specifically was that we had no home. And, you know, shortly after that, I was visiting my mother, and she was telling me a story of one of her neighbors, white neighbors in Mississippi, who, you know, they were discussing black history, et cetera, and she was telling him about our culture. And his response was, "What culture?" I'm not sure which one made me more upset, the white person who said what culture with regards to being black American, African American, or my friends who were black themselves, but they still did not see African Americans as having a distinct and unique culture. This was years ago that this trip to Costa Rica took place. And you know, of course, I stood my ground and argued my points. And some of the points I want to bring out in this podcast, it just says not only as a celebration of Black History Month, but particularly because this is where I am right now. This is where my mindset is, because there is this propensity in our society to look at black people in general, and I'm making a distinction here. Now I'm going to include everyone that's black, Haitian Americans, Jamaican Americans, people from any part of the Caribbean or African descent. And once you come to America, there's this generalization that's placed on most black people that suggests that we don't have a home, or that America is not our home. And that's specifically it. And I know I'm talking about two slightly different things, culture versus nationality. But once you answer the question of nationality, you will understand how deep and how rich our culture as black people goes beyond the things that they tell you during Black History Month, that goes beyond anything that's, music or jazz or, hip hop or any of the things that are readily attributed to us today. I need people to understand that every facet of the United States, for good and for bad, I don't exclude the bad things, every part of the United States is black culture. The United States of America is our home. We built this. Some of us have been here, some of our families have been here longer than white people. I mean, you think the average white person in America, I believe I read, they're 3 generations in the United States of America. There's very few families that go back to the beginning of the United States of America. But if you think about African Americans, people born in America whose heritage, whose bloodline goes back 7, 8, 9 generations, all the way to the beginning of this country, not only were we present, but we built this thing. And so our culture transcends just the color of our skin. Our culture includes ownership of this nation, Never mind the fact, we'll discuss the fact that we have no wealth in this nation. I mean, those things are intentional. Those things are things that we've had to fight all of our lives for generations. But the fact remains, when we talk about national identity and we talk about culture, not only do we have a black specific culture, which I'll talk about also, but we own this nation. So when people say go back to where you come from, the fact of the matter is we've been here longer than most of them. Take a listen into this segment I did with on Like It or Not with regards to James Baldwin and how he solved this equation many years before I even started grappling with it.
One thing that I've had to grapple with being a black person in America is this idea of national identity, in so much as it is even something to be desired. There is a struggle between the reality that your ancestors were literally stripped away from their culture and their society and brought into this country as slaves to build this nation. And we did build this nation. All of the good and the bad, we've contributed to it, to building it and sustaining it since before this nation was even formed. And yet, the very first insult out of the mouths of deeply racist Americans is go back to Africa. Well, no, we won't be going back to Africa anytime soon because, as James Baldwin, the very first person I want to honor this month, as he put it, we are Americans.
Is that in fact, whether I like it or not? I am an American. Now, that is not, I'm not Lyndon Johnson, and I'm not saying that as, I am an American. I don't mean that, no. Alas, I mean something very different. But I do mean that I was formed in a certain crucible. That my school really was the streets of New York City. My frame of reference was George Washington and John Wayne.
James Baldwin understood many years ago what I've in recent years have had to come to grips with. America is my nation. It is my home, whether I like it or not. And almost as important, America is our home, whether white Americans like that or not.
That great western house I come from is one house, and I am one of the children of that house. Simply, I'm the most despised child of that house. And it is because the American people are unable to face the fact that, in fact, I am flesh of their flesh, bone of their bone, created by them. My blood, my father's blood is in that soil. They can't face that.
I'm thinking of James Baldwin today because it was through his words specifically that I finally got it. This nation that is problematic, rooted in white supremacy, riddled with income inequality, homelessness, and poverty, while simultaneously being the richest nation in the world. This nation belongs as much to me as any Donald Trump supporter who wants to tell me to go back to Africa. Nope. My father's bones are buried here. His father's bones are buried here. My mother's family goes back in this nation for at least 6 generations that we can count. And the only reason we can't go back any further than that is because we were not seen as human before that, but chattel. And it took me the first 21 years of my life before being introduced to James Baldwin to figure that out, trying to figure out how it is that I could be a stepchild in my own American home, but knowing at an intrinsic level that this land was just as much mine as it is or was anyone else's. It took me 21 years to stumble onto James Baldwin, who already grappled with and answered that question before I was even born, saying, quote, "I am not a ward of America. I am not the object of some missionary charity. I am one of the people who built the country."
And until that moment, until the moment comes, when we, the American people, are able to accept the fact that I have to accept, for example, that my ancestors are both white and black, that on that continent we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other, and that I am not a ward of America. I'm not an object of missionary charity. I am one of the people who built the country. Until this moment, there is scarcely any hope for the American dream, because the people who are denied participation in it, by their very presence, will wreck it. And if that happens, it's a very grave moment for the West. Thank you.
James Arthur Baldwin, just this man, James Arthur Baldwin, most people remember him for his work as an author, but I remember him because of this particular struggle that he elucidated so clearly for me, that we are the stepchildren. Black people are the stepchildren in America, but we have as much right to America as anyone else, even by virtue of the amount of time we've been in the United States. Never mind the fact that we literally built this nation. Everything from the White House throughout history, some of the greatest contributions came from African Americans. And so once you realize that, you quickly toss this idea out of your head that has been pushed into your brain over and over and over again since you were a child. This idea that as a black person that America's not really your home, or that if it is your home, that you have to conform who you are to their expectations of you. And by they, I mean this American system that's built on white supremacy. It tries to convince you that you must transform and relinquish any of your claims to the revolutionary spirit and the radical spirit that exists in black people, that you have to relinquish that in order to be a true red-blooded American. And if I were to reduce it down to simple ideologies, it's almost as though the only black Americans that are acceptable to white Americans are conservative Americans. And even though that is rather reductionist, it at times feels that way. And the fact of the matter is that, you know, this position that black people, and I'm talking categorically, I'm talking about anyone who has a dark skin or melanin in their skin, or anyone who would be considered by glance to be African American or to be black. You know, once you cross those shores, once you get to the United States, it really doesn't matter to police officers where you come from, whether you're from South Africa or from Haiti or if you're from Brooklyn. It doesn't really matter. Your skin is dark, and so you're going to be treated a certain way. And in that collective spirit, I'm speaking of all of us together. Even though the impetus behind this thought process was triggered by the differences and the argument that I had with a Haitian American, a Jamaican American, and a Costa Rican of African descent. But I will still speak inclusively, because the fact of the matter is we have this drilled into our head from the time that we're born that America is not our home. And that we have this unique problem and situation where we are children without a home because Africa is not our home. We have more in common with white people in America. Like James Baldwin said, our frame of reference was George Washington and John Wayne. Earlier in that same speech, he talked about this realization that happens when you're a kid. You're watching cowboys and Indians, and you know that's the phrase we would use, even though you know it's politically incorrect right now. But the phrase at the time when we were growing up was you were watching cowboys and Indians, and you were rooting for the cowboys, not realizing that in society, in the American society, we are actually the Indians. That's because our entire framework was built, our entire way of thinking was built off of America, off of what America became and evolved into. And what does that do to a person when you identify with a nation in every respect, every way, everything that you know was framed and forged by being in the United States of America, but simultaneously being told that this is not your home? You begin to believe that this is not your home, but you quickly realize if you look across the Atlantic Ocean to the west coast of Africa, you realize that that's not your home either. And so for a minute there, for a moment there, you feel homeless in society. You feel like a people without a land. And then it dawns on you, no, America, this is my land. It's my land by virtue of birthright. I'm not talking about the 14th Amendment. I'm not talking about birthright citizenship, even though that's a thing. I'm talking about the fact that the bones of my family are in the ground for generations, as far back as we can count, as far back as we can, as it is recorded. And the only reason I can't go back any further is because it was all eviscerated in slavery. All of our history was destroyed in slavery. And it's almost as if we just came into existence, the Dixons and the Harveys, my family line. It's almost as if we didn't come into existence until the end of slavery, because that's when we finally got records for ourselves that we could track. But the reality of it is we go back before this country was even formed. One of the first people killed in the Revolutionary War was a black man. And so it's not something to look at just simply because we are in Black History Month, but it's something that I want us to look at because if you've ever felt that despair of not having a home, James Baldwin answered that a long time ago. I'm an American. And this is not something that he said that this is not in a Johnsonian sense. Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the president at that time, it's not in that sense where you're standing up boasting proudly and saying I'm an American. It's almost a resolve. It's almost a painful resolve in your heart to say, I'm an American. And once you say that, you realize I'm in a home that doesn't want me and doesn't want me as I am. If they accept me, it's only if I conform to the things that are acceptable to their Western civilization and their puritanical culture. Anything outside of that framework, they reject us. And so you're, like James Baldwin said, you feel like a stepchild in your home. And that becomes the basis from which most of our activism exists. It's about demanding from this nation that we built, demanding every right, demanding every privilege, demanding, I don't want to say reparations, but a rectifying of the problems that were created and continue to extend from slavery, a recognition, a permanent monument to what slavery has done to the Black experience in America. Not just slavery, but Jim Crow. Not just Jim Crow, but redlining and the continuous exploitation of the Black community for our wealth. Once you realize you are a stepchild, then you demand more than just being a stepchild. You demand to be treated equally and fairly in this country. And now that extends, and where we've answered some of those questions with the Civil Rights Act and things have progressed, we're still in a place where the majority in this country likes to look at us and say to us, go back to Africa. When in fact, the majority of Black people in America have been here longer than the majority of the majority. So who needs to go back to their country? So when we start talking about Black culture and African American culture, it's important to understand that it is inseparable from American culture. But more importantly, American culture is completely inseparable and undefinable without Black culture. And that's why it's so important for everyone. What's happening in the United States of America right now today is a backlash against the shift into the reality that America is 100% owned. Let me start that over. America 100% belongs to something unique that has never existed on this planet. Nationalism that is no longer tied to your ethnicity. And this is why you have the ethno-nationalist backlash that you get from white supremacists all over the world, but specifically the resurgence in the United States of America. See, this conversation isn't just about feeling good about being black. It's also about understanding the root of their hatred that is fomenting. It's almost like they're in their death pangs. They're lashing out one last time to show the world that, to try to convince the world that America belongs to white people. But that is so ahistorical in every sense of the word, not only because of the black experience, but because of the Chinese American experience, because of the Indian American experience. And I'm speaking specifically about people from India, not Native Americans, right? For all the different nations and cultures and ethnicities that came here and have contributed to building America into what it is, there is no ethnicity, no single ethnicity that can lay hold onto America. And that is infuriating to white people who actually have to come to grips with the same reality. They don't have a home in Germany. They're no more British than I am from the west coast of Africa. They don't have a home to go to outside of the United States, and then they realize that their home is my home. We are brothers and sisters in this American experiment that started off with genocide and slavery, and yet we've not come to it. It's almost as if this is just an epiphany, or perhaps maybe this is an epiphany that has to be had every generation. And then what of, and I mentioned the genocide, but what of the Native Americans and their displacement and their treatment at the hands of this country? We have some identity issues here in the United States that have not been resolved. The United States doesn't quite know what it is yet. At least it's not willing to try to be what it actually is. We're just now putting up monuments in honor of Dr. King. When you think about all the monuments to white supremacy that still remain across this country. We're just now, we're only a good 50 to 60 years in to embracing the blackness of America. The black children who have been living in the house of America since the beginning, contributing, building, sacrificing, fighting, dying in every way that any white person has ever contributed. We're just now getting a black president, and the backlash to a black president, something like we've never seen before. And this is why identity politics actually matters. It matters because America is having an identity crisis. You have a large portion of America who is still fighting against the reality that America was never a white nation, ever. America was never a white nation, and yet in their minds, they like to dream of an America that only white men contributed to, not even white women. And coming to a generation where that is changed forever is causing a significant portion of the backlash that we see with ethno-nationalists across this nation. But the bad thing for them is that while black people are proud and other minorities that are coming into the majority, going to be a majority minority nation soon, while many of us are proud of who we are and where we're from and the things that we contributed to this society, I don't think that it's quite clicked in all of our minds that this nation is 100% ours, equally, across all races, all religions, all ethnicities. It's 100% ours because it is something unique and something new. And this is not to elevate America above anything else, other than to say we have something, what James Baldwin said, there's an experiment. There's something that's being formed here that has never been on the face of the planet. And that is a collection of individuals who have that our only shared experience is that we built this thing together. We look different, we talk different, different faiths, different sexualities, different belief systems. And yet we're all in this nation creating something and fighting against the idea of white supremacy, which is holding on as much as it possibly can. And so, whereas at one point, it's almost shameful for a black person to be proud to be an American because of what America did to us. But then from another vantage point, this country, what it's become, both good and bad, belongs to us. And our cultures are inseparable. You can't define one without the other. You can't define black culture without America. Black culture, quite literally, is the struggle against America to be who we are, which is American. We're born, it's in our blood, it's in our DNA. It's like, if there's nothing else that we understand across the entire race, and there's nothing else that we agree on across the entire race, it's the fact of the black struggle in American history. And one of the things that the woman from Costa Rica dismissed right away when she was challenging the idea of black people having no culture, the very first thing she dismissed was she summarized the entire civil rights movement and the black struggle into one person, like most people do. They summarize it and minimize it into just being Dr. King. So the very first thing she said was, and don't tell me about Dr. King. And I'm like, no, I didn't say that. But still, I felt like that because I'm like, you don't understand. You want to say that we have no land. No, we have an entire nation. You want to say that we have no culture, but we have culture that is rooted in Americanism. We have culture that's rooted in just our blackness as individuals. Our culture includes whiteness. Our culture includes the fight against whiteness, specifically the fight against white supremacy. Our culture is about the fight and the struggle. And while that may be depressing to some, it has brought great liberation to so many people. I mean, think about all of the people who have benefited from the black freedom struggle. Think about where we are with LGBTQ rights today, which we would not be here where we are today had it not been for the fight that black people took on for our own liberation. And it's from that vantage point that you look back at what America was and what America is, both the bad and the good. And as a black person, say that this is my land, this is my country, and this is my home. I will be comfortable in my home. I will be happy in my home. And I will make sure that this home of mine becomes better every single day, every year, every generation, that this nation improves. And this is why I demand of this nation to do better, not only here domestically, but foreign policy, internationally. And demand that we stop committing war crimes across the globe. Demand that we stop exploiting people in the global south, entire nations in the global south that we exploit. Demand that this country becomes better, not only for black people here in the United States, but for black and brown people and people of color all around the globe. Because I don't want my home to be a shithole. I want my home to be a place that I can be proud of. That's all I have time for today. Thanks so much for joining me. It has been a great week. I enjoy doing the podcast with you. The production value, I like the podcast. So I hope that you're enjoying them. And besides, to be honest with you, YouTube sucks now. YouTube is not the place for content creators. Spreaker and iTunes, that's the place. They actually pay you. So I hope that as you're listening to this, that you won't even listen to it on YouTube anymore. Go to Spreaker.com or go to iTunes and download the podcast so that you can listen for free if you're not a patron, and I can still make enough money to buy new equipment and continue to grow the project. So thanks so much for hanging out with me. I will see you all on Monday.